My family owns a vacation home in Colorado, purchased primarily because my parents are avid skiers. The home has been in our family since before I was born, and at around 40 years old, it's definitely showing its age. My dad has done a lot of upkeep over the years, but now it's really on its last legs. He's considered knocking it down to build a new place, though I don't usually get involved in those decisions. This story takes place about 15 years ago, when I was 8 and my brother Josh was 11. We were up in Colorado during a blizzard, and the snowfall was incredible. Naturally, we had to go outside and play. One of the best things about being there as kids was the vast amount of space. The property features a large open area surrounded by woods, with a dead-end road leading downhill to a few other equally spacious properties. It was perfect for games like hide-and-seek or snowball fights. One day, Josh and I bundled up in our snow gear to play a snowball fight using our own custom rules. We set up 2 forts, choosing their locations while letting each other know where we were building. We then created a giant snowball, which we called the Jewel, that we had to steal from each other's bases. Josh decided to set up his fort on the nearest neighboring property, which was mostly deserted. There were rarely cars there. This allowed us to freely play on their land. We built makeshift walls to create our forts and placed the big snowball behind them. To reach each other's bases, we could either cut through the woods or take the road up or down to the opposite fort. Once, Josh ran down the road and disappeared. I was supposed to wait for him to blow the whistle to signal the start of the game. I waited for what felt like a long time, over 5 minutes. By then, he had already set up his fort, so all he had to do was return and blow the whistle. When I reached the 10-minute mark, I figured I probably just couldn't hear him, so I started plotting my route. Should I go through the woods or down the road? I chose the road because, honestly, the thought of navigating the woods during a blizzard at 8 years old was intimidating. I trudged through the unplowed snow, snowflakes blowing into my face. Thankfully, with all the layers my mom had made me wear, I wasn't cold at all. As I approached the driveway of the neighboring property, I peered through the trees but didn't see Josh. With all the brush and bare trees in winter, it was easy to see through the woods, so I decided to sneak onto the property. However, Josh was nowhere in sight. I could see his fort, so I looked around, and when I confirmed he was missing, I moved toward the fort to grab the jewel. Just then, I heard a woman's voice calling out, "Excuse me, are you looking for your brother?" I turned to see an older woman at the front door of the neighbor's house. I replied that we were playing a game, and she said, "Your brother isn't here." Confused, I walked toward the front steps. As I got closer, I noticed the woman looked much older than she probably was. Then I spotted someone looking out of one of the upstairs windows. For a moment, I thought it was Josh, someone with half their face covered, presumably by a black beanie, with the bottom part of their face hidden beneath the window. I also noticed another set of footprints leading to the front door. They had to be Josh's. The woman gave me a very unsettling smile, and I felt my heart drop. She waved for me to come inside and get out of the cold. I stopped in my tracks and shouted, "Josh!" but there was no response. The woman's smile faded. She seemed surprised by my reaction. I then noticed that the other set of footprints was turned around. If it was Josh, his footprints had headed back toward the woods. I then heard heavy footsteps coming from inside the house, as if someone was coming down from upstairs. I started to run, and the woman shouted something at me, or maybe at someone else, but I couldn't make it out. I glanced back at the house, and the face that had been at the window was no longer there. I bolted off the property and back onto the road, retracing my steps. Soon, I heard my dad's whistling from up the hill, the same whistle he used to call my brother and me home for dinner. When I reached our driveway, my dad and Josh were already there, having come to find me. Before I could explain what had just happened, Josh told me that people in the neighbor's house had been calling for him to come inside. I shared that the same thing had happened to me. My dad grabbed something to use as a weapon and went down there while we waited at home with our mom. After a long while, he returned and said that the front door was locked and no one was answering. We then went to another neighbor's house, who knew the owners, and called them. This part still gives me chills. My dad learned that the owners of that house weren't there that weekend. Nobody was supposed to be inside. The police were called, and my brother and I spoke to one of the officers about the woman. After that, we were no longer involved. According to my dad, the back door was unlocked, and the house was investigated, but nothing was found. Because of this, my parents decided to take home any extra valuable items out of fear of a break-in while we were gone. After that day, we avoided playing on that property due to the unsettling memory. Thank God we didn't go in that house. I've been skiing for as long as when I was a kid. My parents, who met while skiing competitively, made sure my siblings and I learned at a young age. Fast forward about 20 years. I'm now 21, and this story takes place a few winters ago. As a senior in college, I knew the best skiing in the Northeast was in Vermont. Our trip was like any other, just me, Jaden, Ryland, and Air. I can't recall which mountain we were at since Jaden booked everything and Ryland was driving, but it was massive, probably Killington, with 7 ski lifts covering various peaks. We skied for nearly 2 full days, and I'm sure there were still trails we missed. On the second day, after a solid day of skiing, we had a good handle on the trails we liked. This day was all about pushing our limits, as usual. I'd be lying if I said we didn't indulge in a few fireball shooters to keep the energy up. The trip was a blast. The double blacks never got old, and racing down the slopes felt like a game. With about an hour left until the lifts closed, we were exhausted, but didn't want to leave. As we contemplated how to wrap up our trip at the top of the lift, 2 girls approached us without helmets. This might sound odd, but I have to mention this detail. The girls, one brunette and one blonde, were truly stunning. 2 of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. It was disarming. They introduced themselves as Taylor and Devin, and we began chatting. They mentioned they were bored because the mountain was filled with older folks, which I had actually noted to my friends the day before. It made sense they approached us, a group of young guys who seemed to be around their age. Devin appeared to be an experienced skier, peppering Air with technical questions about his skis. He and Ryland owned their own high-end skis, while Jaden and I always rented, which impressed the girls. Taylor commented on our shooters, and we jokingly claimed that the alcohol unlocked our true skiing potential, or something silly like that, which they found amusing. To our surprise, Devin pulled out an unmarked bottle and teased us for sticking to something as tame as Fireball. We accepted the challenge and took swigs from their bottle, which sent Ryland a bit over the edge. He often drank more than he could handle, so this wasn't surprising. I decided to hold back on drinking too much because something about the situation felt off. I found it hard to believe that these 2 girls would want anything to do with a bunch of kids like us, especially since we were all wearing helmets that obscured our faces. Despite that, things were going well. Amir was being his usual flirtatious self, and Taylor seemed receptive, so I didn't mind. I figured we'd spend the rest of our time on the slopes with them, which was fine by me. Who knows, maybe they had plans for after the slopes closed. Just then, Devin asked if we had skied down a trail called Devil's Forest, a name I didn't recognize. Our friend Chase would have had the trail map memorized, as he was like a walking GPS, but he wasn't with us. We told them we hadn't skied it, and they explained that it was a glade trail, a bit obscure and rarely open. For those who don't know, glades are trails that weave between trees, allowing you to ski through the forest. We actually enjoyed glades more than anything else, so the Devil's Forest Trail intrigued us. We agreed to check it out, and they signaled for us to follow. We reached a point where we had to take off our skis and walk slightly uphill for a short while. I noticed we were in a relatively secluded part of the mountain. The snow was pristine, and there was no one around. The thought of an adventure was invigorating. I thought nothing of it. Drunk and curious, We unclipped our skis and followed the girls up the mountain. Air and Ryland rushed ahead, likely to flirt with them, while Jaden and I hung back a bit to give them space. I noticed Jaden looked a little wary, so I asked him what was on his mind. I like to think of us as the rational, level-headed ones in the group. Air was unpredictable and impulsive, and Ryland would follow a girl anywhere. Jaden pointed out that it was strange for this supposed trail to be inaccessible from a ski lift, which I agreed with. I had never had to walk uphill to reach a trail before. We decided to stay alert. What could two girls possibly do to a group of four big guys? They led us into the forest, and soon the terrain began to level out. Jaden and I caught up with the group, and it was clear that Ryland and Amir had made considerable progress. Ryland had his arm around Devon, who was smiling and laughing as they pointed down the slope we had been traveling, which had suddenly turned steep. I sighed, realizing we could have used Chase's help. He would have known exactly where we were and where this trail led. Jaden remained skeptical and asked the girls if they were sure this was a real trail. They assured us it was and said it would take us right back to the lifts. Before I could respond, Devon pulled out the bottle again and insisted we finish it. Amir and Ryland eagerly took hefty swigs, but when the bottle reached Jaden, he said he was drunk enough. The moment he spoke, I could have sworn Devon's smile briefly turned into an angry scowl, but by the time I blinked, she was smiling again. I must have been the only one to notice, as my friend's expressions remained normal. She gave Jaden a seductive smile and batted her eyes, prompting him to reluctantly grab the bottle, likely just to appease her. When it got to me, I held the bottle to my mouth but didn't actually drink. Alarm bells were ringing in my head about this whole encounter. I handed the bottle back to Devon, who quickly put it away. I realized that neither girl had taken a drink this entire time, and it dawned on me that I hadn't seen either of them drink anything. I checked my phone, and there was only half an hour left until the lifts closed. I tried to come up with an excuse for why we couldn't ski this trail, saying we wouldn't have enough time to get back down the mountain to where we had parked. The girls insisted we had plenty of time and that the lifts were connected at the bottom. Then, without warning, they told us we were wasting too much time and took off toward the slope, urging us to follow if we could. Amir and Ryland immediately followed, clearly hoping for a good outcome at the bottom. Jaden and I didn't want to go, but we felt we had no choice but to follow. So, we did. I let Jaden lead the way because this was still a challenging slope, and skiing in the forest is no joke. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but when we reached the bottom, relief washed over me. The four of them were there, laughing and flirting as they had before. Jaden and I caught up with the group, but something felt off. There was no lift in sight, and we were still surrounded by forest on all sides. I sternly asked the girls where the lift was, and they told me to stop worrying, assuring me it was nearby and that they'd take us there in a few minutes. I relaxed a bit, thinking I had been worried for nothing. As I rubbed my eyes, I heard a distinct thump in the snow. I opened them to see Ryland passed out on his back. The girls laughed, calling him a lightweight, but I could sense it was more serious. Before I could react, Air slumped over too. Panic surged through me, and I rushed to them, unclipping my skis. I was relieved to see they were breathing, but my horror intensified. Jaden stepped toward the girls, demanding to know what was happening. They looked genuinely shocked and claimed they had no idea what was wrong. Jaden took another step before he too collapsed in the snow. I stared in disbelief, trying to comprehend the situation. I couldn't believe this was happening to us. My head spun, and I felt sure I was next. The girls had stopped pretending, now looking at me as if they were waiting for me to pass out. I felt dizzy, so I sat down in the snow, even though I wanted to stay standing. I demanded to know what they had given us, but they didn't respond or even move. I yelled at them repeatedly, but they remained unresponsive. I wanted to get up, but I literally couldn't stand. I didn't pass out, though. I kept my eyes open the whole time. Eventually, Taylor turned to Devon and remarked that I must not have drunk enough. She looked more annoyed than anything. Devin cursed and told Taylor they had to leave. Still frozen after unclipping my skis, I watched them take Air and Ryland's skis before trudging off into the woods. I knew I had to do something, but my body felt numb. I couldn't let them walk away with my friend's skis. I figured they wouldn't be able to move quickly, carrying 2 sets of skis each, especially in the snow. After a few more minutes, I began to regain control of my body. I stumbled after their tracks in the snow, but it was alarming how far they had gotten, even with the extra weight. Eventually, I rounded a bend and spotted them in the distance, far ahead of me. I figured as long as I kept them in sight, I could track them down. I followed for a couple of minutes, and that's when things took a turn. The forest opened up into a clearing that led to a road. We must have been on the opposite side of the ski mountain, which made sense in hindsight. That's when I spotted the van parked in the distance. I stopped at the edge of the woods as the side door of the van swung open, and 4 large guys stepped out to intercept the girls. The girls signaled for the men to get back in the van, but one of them turned and pointed directly at me. At that moment, I realized I was in way too deep and felt foolish for leaving my unconscious friends behind in the woods. The guys inside the van seemed to be debating whether to leave or chase me, and I wasn't waiting around to find out. I turned and wobbled back the way I came, knowing I could follow the tracks I left in the snow. When I found them, they were still passed out. I figured Jaden had drunk the least, so I tried shaking him awake first. After a few handfuls of snow to the face, he was awake enough to talk. I quickly explained what had happened, still in shock. We tried to wake Air and Ryland, but had no luck. Jaden and I felt we had no better option than to hope those guys didn't come looking for us, but they never appeared. I might not be telling this story if they had. We waited about an hour for our friends to wake up, and when they finally did, we filled them in on everything. We had a million questions. Who were those girls? Who were those guys? What were they planning to do? It was chilling to think about what could have happened if I hadn't been quick enough to pretend to drink. The best case scenario would have been waking up robbed, but even that would have been terrible. Something told me that no one would go to those lengths just to rob a group of broke college kids. Besides, who really keeps valuables on them? When skiing, I suppose Amir and Ryland's expensive skis were tempting enough to steal, but it felt like overkill. How could they have known we had high-end gear instead of rentals? Nothing about it made sense. Finding the car was a nightmare. Reporting it to the police was a nightmare, and the drive home was a nightmare. The mountain staff promised they'd identify those guys, but we had to hit the road and couldn't stick around to verify that. The police took it a bit more seriously and said they'd keep us updated if anything came up. I think it even made local news, but it's been years now, and they clearly never found anything. To this day, we still have no idea what kind of drug they used on us. Nothing online described anything that worked so quickly, especially in such a small amount. Our best guess is that it was a mix of drugs, which makes sense since all my friends felt woozy after they woke up. Those girls and whoever else was involved were definitely sick people. I can only hope it was just an elaborate robbery and nothing more. This might sound a bit strange, but please bear with me. Every winter, my friends Kyle, Ricky, and I have a tradition of walking out onto a frozen lake a few towns over. It's not a grand event. We do it simply for fun. There's something about being on the ice, surrounded by the quiet stillness, that feels almost otherworldly. It's one of those simple pleasures we've always cherished. Call us odd, but we can't get enough of the serenity. If you've ever been alone in nature, hearing only the gentle fall of snowflakes, you know what I mean. It feels like you have a piece of nature all to yourself. Plus, the photos always turn out great, which is a bonus for a couple of edgy guys like us. This story takes place this past winter about 4 months ago, as I write this in April. I can guess what you're thinking, but don't worry, none of us fell through the ice. That's not the focus of this story. It was snowing heavily that night, which was why we chose to go. The temperatures had been consistently below freezing for weeks, so we felt confident the lake was completely frozen over. Personally, I'd choose winter over summer any day, and I bet my friends would agree. There are countless reasons for this, but one is simply the beauty of snowfall. It's not just pretty, it also means you're never in complete darkness. Even after sunset, the light reflecting off the white snow blurs the line between day and night, creating a surreal atmosphere. The moon was quite full that night too. That feeling was amplified. Kyle was driving that night in his pickup, which handled the snow well, so we decided to let him take the wheel, even though Ricky usually drove us around. The lake is surrounded by a thin cluster of trees, which prevented us from getting all the way to the water's edge. We parked in a nearby lot and stepped out into the freezing air, bundling up against the cold as we walked toward the lake. I didn't smoke at the time, and I still don't, but Ricky and Kyle lit a couple of cigarettes as we made our way. I think it was after midnight, though I can't say for sure. All I remember is the eerie stillness. There wasn't a soul out there, no animals, no people, just the three of us in complete silence. When we reached the lake, it appeared completely frozen over, just as we expected. We were laughing about something silly when Kyle picked up a small boulder and tossed it onto the ice to test its strength. It didn't crack, so we took that as a sign to venture further onto the lake. We didn't go too far, maybe 100 feet out, but enough to feel the thrill when something caught our attention on the far side, near where the trees met the ice. Something large and dark was moving slowly toward us. We immediately fell silent, frozen in place, watching it approach. It was hunched over, and finally we realized it was a bear. Ricky was the first to break the silence, whispering, "Is that a bear?" as quietly as he could. I didn't respond. My heart was racing. If it was a bear, the last thing we wanted was to draw its attention. We stood there frozen, barely daring to breathe. As the figure moved closer, something felt off. Its gait wasn't quite right, too upright, too human. I also noticed something dragging behind it. Nothing about the scene made sense. It was one of the strangest things I had ever witnessed. Then it straightened up completely, and we realized the truth simultaneously. It wasn't a bear. It was a person dressed in what looked like a bear suit. Kyle whispered, "What the hell?" And I was thinking the exact same thing. I know it may not sound frightening in a typical way, but if you had been there, you would have been terrified too. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I wasn't sure if I was more afraid or confused, but something urged me to remain silent. The figure continued toward the ice, dragging something behind it. At first, the snow obscured the details, but as it approached, I could see that it was holding a rope attached to whatever it was dragging. Moments later, we could make it out more clearly. It was a small black bag, resembling a smaller-sized garbage bag, if those even existed. Either way, it was chilling. We stood there, paralyzed and unsure of what to do. My mind screamed at me to turn around and leave, but my body felt immobilized. I couldn't move. I don't think Ricky and Kyle were eager to turn around and leave either, because neither of them flinched. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have left even if I hadn't been so scared. I needed to know what that person was doing. Then, as if the situation couldn't get any stranger, the man unzipped and stepped out of the bear suit. Seeing him as a person didn't make things any better. He wasn't particularly large or intimidating, but there was something deeply unsettling about him. We watched as he bent down, presumably to pick up a rock, but I couldn't tell from that distance. Then the sound started. He knelt, holding what looked like a rock, and began repeatedly slamming it into the ice. It might have been a placebo effect, but I swear I could feel the vibrations in the ice, even from far away. He seemed to be trying to break through, likely to dispose of whatever was in that bag. Ricky tapped my shoulder, and I turned to see him and Kyle moving back toward solid ground. Without a word, I followed them, and the three of us tried to move quickly without making too much noise. Every step felt deafening in the quiet, even though I knew there was no way that guy could hear the crunch of snow from that far away. We barely made it a few yards when a voice yelled, "Hey!" from behind us. I didn't even look back. I just started running, praying that guy didn't have a gun. The cold made it worse. I found myself getting winded after barely a minute of running. I don't know if he followed. I don't think he did. But at that moment, we were in full panic mode. We reached the edge of the lake, and I was gasping for breath. After a very short break, we made our way back to the car in silence, and Kyle drove off immediately. None of us had any idea what we had just seen. Kyle suggested it was probably someone dumping trash, but I argued that was ridiculous. Who in their right mind would dress up in a bear suit in the middle of winter just to illegally dump trash? There was no way. Ricky insisted it was definitely someone dumping a body, but I told him the bag was way too small for that. We discussed it the entire ride home, but we couldn't agree on a solid explanation. We never got an answer. The reason I'm thinking about this now is that my mom was watching TV the other day when an old missing persons report popped up on the screen. It was about a child from our area, and the timeline of his disappearance matched closely with what we had seen on that lake. I'm not jumping to conclusions. I know it's a long shot and probably just a coincidence, but I can't help but wonder if those two things are somehow related. By the time you're hearing this, we've probably reported our sighting to the police. Do you enjoy creepy and bizarre stories during the winter season? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching until the end. See you in the next video.